we are all broken in one way, shape, or form. The people I serve in Haiti, they have brokenness, but you know what? I have brokenness in me as well. But I also have incredible strength, and they have incredible strength. You have a role to play on this earth. Like, you aren't just supposed to be here to be like getting and receiving all the free handouts that we give you. You are an active member of society, and you can be part of your change.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Time for Forgiveness, and we have a very special guest, but also a very special friend today, Tim Brand from Des Moines, Iowa. Tim, welcome to Time for Forgiveness.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here and share this time together for sure.
We're super jazzed. I'll just give you a little of the high points of Tim. He's an incredible guy. He's impacting people all over the globe through his foundation. Tim Brand is the founder and CEO of Many Hands, established in 2008. As CEO, he provides vision and leadership for U.S. and international operations. Many Hands impacts over 25,000 people in 3 countries and reaches over 200,000 people per year in the U.S. Business and mission and retail stores that Tim operates in the Midwest. So Tim's an incredible guy. We actually met down in the Bahamas. I think it was in early June, Tim.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a father-son retreat, and I brought my son RJ, and Tim was there, and so we had a great bonding just over 3 days, and it was amazing how quickly we got to know each other. I think it went from a handshake to when we left, we're hugging, and I felt like I really got to know the person you are, Tim, and that's why we're here today. I was so impressed with everything you're doing, but more importantly, just your heart to impact people, especially down in Haiti and the Bahamas. So thanks for all you do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and feelings mutual. I mean, there's a resonance when you meet like-minded people that you can just feel, and that you just know there's something deeper there. And I think through shared stories that we both shared some of our stories together, you see something that's deeper. And I've just been incredibly privileged to be able to walk through that and be able to walk with you and your son a little bit in some of these early journeys for him, and just incredibly grateful for that friendship. So thank you, Bob.
I was so impressed with AJ too. I
mean,
he's a little bit behind RJ, but who's such an impressive young man. It was really cool to see him.
That's my son. AJ is my 14-year-old son. He's an 8th grader. He's living the dream, man. I wish I could go back to being a 14-year-old. Whole life in front of you. Yeah. Life is good. Play some sports, hang out with your friends, and he does have a girlfriend on the side. So, but he's a good kid.
I think though, I think it's important, just what you said earlier, is that, we connect through sharing stories and telling our stories. But I think that there's a reservation with a lot of people to tell their stories because you have to be vulnerable.
Right.
And your life doesn't always look perfect sometimes. It's kind of messy, but we want people to think it's perfect. And as we're talking about our son, your son, 20-some and 14, and the ability to start somewhat being educated, and also in a way shown through practice that it's good to tell your story and it's necessary to tell your story, because that's how you connect with one another. Do you find that it's a struggle in the beginning when you bring these people together for them to open up and start telling their stories?
Yeah, I think a couple things, and I've sent literally thousands of people all around the world to go and serve together, learn together, share time together, and everyone comes from different backgrounds. But the cool thing is if you do it well and do it with intention, where you have the space, you have the atmosphere, you create the ability for people to be vulnerable in a way that is honoring, because you can also manipulate through vulnerability too. But I think if you do it well and you do it honoring, and then ultimately you give them tools to go back and see, like, you know what, like, we're all a mess. In the days, we're all broken. It's one thing that I've learned through my work that I do is we are all broken in one way, shape, or form. The people I serve in Haiti, they have brokenness, but you know what? I have brokenness in me as well. But I also have incredible strength, and they have incredible strength. And when we're able to come together and sit with one another, and I can hear your story of brokenness, but yet strength, and you can hear my story of brokenness and strength, and when we can balance those together through our shared experiences, our shared stories, that I can start to give of my strength and know that this is helping them, and they can in turn give to me, and I can receive that. So there's a more beautiful picture put together. I've seen that time and time again work, and so I'm always excited to bring people to places like Abaco, Bahamas, which is where I met Bob, Pion, Haiti, which is where I serve and have historically have served for a long, long time, because I just think something happens when you can do that well, and then hopefully they take a little bit of that back to their own families, their own stories, their own community, because we all need to share in that. We all need to have those experiences where, you know what, I am vulnerable enough to say I own my weaknesses, but I also have incredible strength too. And that's those don't go. Those aren't opposites. Those are actually yin and yang. Those go together. And when you can understand that full story, I think you're just able to be a little bit more vulnerable in those spaces.
Yeah, and Tim, you tell your story here in your book, Standing on the Shoulders. This is a book about you and your dad and your relationship and kind of that narrative that played through the years. And what I love about it is that nobody that's done anything of any significance, they've had somebody that they stood on their shoulders to get where they're at. And obviously that person, a big part of that in your life was your dad, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
Maybe
we should kind of just start there.
Can I have the book, because we're getting ahead of ourselves? I had already, I thought I don't even need to read any further in this book, because this one question is the conversation for the entire podcast. It said, this is a question that all of us, I do believe, need to wrestle with. Will those who come behind you need to fix all the things you broke during your life, or will they stand on foundations you built, stronger because of the way you lived? And then you further go into what a good life looks like. It's that your dad, he was real, and he gets to the people he loved, and people loved him for it. I really started thinking about that in my own life. What would someone need to fix, or am I really providing that foundation that they can stand on as well? I'd love for you to start there, if you would.
Yeah. Well, again, taking people that I've gone with all over the world and being with them, is you realize a lot of them are chasing the ghost of something in their past. Whether that means a family member that hurt them, a situation that hurt them, something that they thought they were supposed to be that maybe they're not. And a lot of that comes from usually a father or a mother or a parent figure that they felt they either didn't live up to expectations, or those parents were very harsh, very hard on them. And so ultimately I've seen them spend their whole lifetime trying to fix that relationship through different ways. And sometimes the outcomes of that are very hurtful. And one thing that I was really blessed on as I walked my dad through his final time on earth, because he had cancer, he had terminal cancer, and that's where the book kind of starts at, is I realized I didn't have to spend a ton of my time chasing something to go fix something else. And I wasn't chasing this ghost necessarily, because my dad was pretty real. And there was a lot of hurt. There's just like anyone else. There's hurt as you are a parent. We're both parents. You think that somehow there's this magic formula that I knew how to be a parent when I was just, you have a kid. Oh, I know how to be a parent. Well, you don't. You have to figure it out. But at the same point is my dad knew how to say, I'm sorry very quickly. He knew how to do it in a way that was honoring. He knew how to do it to my mother, because he was harsh to my mom at times, but then he would also come back and say why he was sorry. And he did it publicly in front of us kids too, so we could see it as well. And my mom also had enough grace to be able to say, your dad's not perfect, but I still honor him. Because that's some of it too, is like, again, when, especially I think between the male and the female, when the male verbally or downplays the female, is the female will get up by not honoring the male figure or the father figure, and then undermines the authority of the male figure. And I was just so happy as I looked at my life and I looked at the gift that my dad had given me. There wasn't this wasted energy of trying to figure out, like, I got to go fix this stuff. And the one thing that really resonated with me is when I did his eulogy, I looked around the room and I looked through all these different things, whether it be in church relationships, business relationships, family relationships, which he owned a family business. There wasn't any animosity or someone in your room, you're like, that person should be here, but there's hurt between him and my dad and somebody else,
Yeah.
where there's that hurt that happens because of passion, and then that passion gets sideways and hurt happens. And what a blessing to live your life and to see at the end of it, like there isn't these broken relationships, aren't there just these pieces, these shards of a fractured life.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was really, really telling. And I was like, how do I help others then see what a good life looks like? And it's not just all fame and money and all the stuff we see on media, those sort of things. There really is some elements of it. And that's what I tried to draw out is these gifts that my dad had given me and given our family because of the way that he lived.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think the fact that you didn't have to carry that weight, at the end, you could just focus your love and your attention on your dad, making sure he was going to be in the space he needed to be in. Yeah. Tim, what would you say when you said your dad, he was an example of somebody that in a positive way showed through how he lived, that he was willing to forgive and say he was sorry. Where do you think that came from? Because for most people, that's not the narrative that they play out in their life. Typically, like where I grew up, I didn't see that really. I didn't hear, I'm sorry or will you forgive me? How do you think? How did your dad come to embody those traits? Do you think?
So I know that didn't come from a familiar heritage. His mom never told him he loved him until the very end.
Oh.
She was one of those that like we would say my grandma would say I love you and she'd go me too. She always did the me too.
Yeah.
It was always just like
Me
me
too.
too.
I love that.
But she couldn't say the
Right.
words I love you.
Yeah.
And his dad was pretty harsh. I mean, he grew up in the area, went through the Depression, had a farm, lost it all. And, he was just a hardworking Iowa Midwesterner that, you don't show affection and love.
Right.
That's just not what you do. And so that's where my dad grew up. I can say for him, the turning point came from two things. My mom, number one, and the way that my mom loved him. And my mom went through some pretty traumatic things when it was like 12 or 11. Her dad had a massive brain aneurysm, and they thought he was going to die, but he didn't at 36 years old. And they ended up tying a knot in the top of his head. And because of that, half his body was paralyzed, and it changed his personality. And my mom had to walk through that with both my grandmother, her mom, sisters, family. She was the eldest. And I think walking through that changed her a lot of ways because her father was a different person before and after. The brain stuff that happened, the bleeding in the brain. And this is before the time where you could just cauterize it. I mean, they literally had to tie it at the top of his head. And so her encounter with that and walking through that and then meeting my dad, she had a lot of work to do. Like a lot of us, there was a lot of chiseling and a lot of gruffness that needed to be worked out. Second thing is my dad will point to what was called Crucio back in the day, was a weekend encounter with Christ and the love that he encountered. And I think ultimately that's where it broke for him, is he encountered a love that he had never experienced himself. And through that love, then it changed him so he could go out and love a different way to other people. And so he made choices in his life to say, not that he got it perfect, but this is what I want to be about, and this is what I'm trying to be about, and then to be able to express that with other people.
That's really neat. I, as you were saying that you explain the gifts, and we have gifts around us that are free and we can access at any time, but maybe those gifts aren't ones that we've practiced. But the one that really was speaking to me is obviously meaningful conversations as we're having here now, but the generosity, because we think that, it's just writing a check, but it goes beyond that. It's generosity with our time. You were talking about how your dad was always available for one more letter, one more cup of coffee, and the ability to share the generosity of time that really makes someone feel they're important. And I want to acknowledge you for your generosity of time. Before we started rolling, you're telling me that you're supposed to be in Haiti tomorrow. And here you in person came to Kansas City for this generosity of time for this meaningful conversation. Yeah. So that's been practiced.
Yeah.
You've seen it practiced.
Yeah. And I think that's where we put a box around what generosity looks like. Well, it's writing a check. But honestly, forgiveness is one of the most generous acts around. It's a generous act because the person that you're forgiving does not deserve that forgiveness most times. But we have to come to a place where eye out of generosity. And for me, I'm a person of faith. So that generosity comes from a father who sent his son that had no business to be here, didn't deserve any of it, but yet he did that on behalf of us. So he gave us forgiveness, and we in turn are then called to forgive others. And so that generosity then spills over. One of the coolest stories that I can say is I was in our Christian bookstore that sells cards and stuff, and I was checking out, and my dad had passed away a couple months earlier, and the lady behind the counter just started crying, and she's like, "Man, your dad was in here so often buying cards for people." She's like, I knew him, like we had a conversation every time, and I just miss seeing his face. I miss seeing him
that's really
because
cool.
he was here so often buying cards that he'd write to other people. And the other thing that I think I learned is the generosity to know that you did all you could, but then also to know I don't have to be right. My dad, there were situations where he did what he's supposed to do, but he didn't necessarily end up being the right one, because how many of us, and myself included, we go at something because we want to be right, and we want to get the last word, and we want to make sure, yeah, I'll forgive you, but I'm going to make sure I was on the right. And I looked back at my dad's history, and he had multiple times where he chose, because the relationship was more important than being right, to say, I choose the relationship over being right. And I think that is a really tough thing sometimes for us to grasp, but he did it, and he modeled it in a way that was glorifying and honored the person. And hopefully it spilled over to me a little bit as well.
Yeah, that I think as you're saying that, it is very difficult. Let's just say that at times, especially in a marriage relationship, to say I'm going to put what's most important for our relationship ahead of me feeling I'm right,
Yeah.
and making sure that he's heard that I'm right.
Yeah.
That's something that I have worked on for a while, because I had seen in my parents' relationship, and they're, been happily married and have an amazing relationship. And it's been an example for me. But I had also noticed there was one that would have a really difficult time saying they were sorry. So the other one would just say it first, just so they could move on. And so I tried that in our relationship, and it didn't, it didn't work very well. So as you're saying that is very important to let go of what's most important. And it's really not about being right all the time.
Not all the time. And it doesn't mean that you aren't strong, or that you don't have conviction, but it's also getting to the point where I have done what I'm supposed to do in obedience, and I'm willing to let go of it, because this is what I was asked to do. Now, whether you receive that, understand that I'm right, that's up to you, but I'm not going to keep hammering on this thing until you completely agree with me, or this is like, that's where I saw my dad in a couple different situations. One was in dealing with some, when you're in a family business and things like that, is, walking through some of those things, and where him and my uncle, like, they chose to sell the business, and that's tough. Like, so how do you do that? And, coming to that agreement, coming to the number, and walking through that, and to be able to walk out of that, where our families vacation together. Like, that's where I grew up, in the Lake of the Ozarks. That's our families did that. So when I went to the lake, it was grandpa, grandma, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of us sitting in one house. And that was so important for my dad and my uncle both, to be able to walk away from a business dealing and to say, that's more important. So we might be able to got a few more dollars here. We could have maybe done something here, but you know what? That's not worth the sacrifice of us as a family to stay together. And that was one example for me. Another one was stood out hands down. My dad would take in people that were having problems. So, like, one was an alcoholic man. He has 10 kids. He was abusing his wife. He was trying to go through rehab. He was trying to make his life right. And my dad took him into his house. So he stayed in the basement of our house. And as my mom and dad tried to mentor him and walk with him, and got him a job, and they actually bought a car for him. And I would love to say there's an end of the story that's wonderful, but the man took the car and he left, and he's gone. But I never heard my dad in bitterness say, like, that was stupid, or that was dumb, or that was the wrong call. And he's like, we did what we were supposed to do with that. How he chose to use that gift, that's on him. and he's going to have to stand in front of the Lord someday and account for what he did. But that's not from our unwillingness to step into that situation and do what we were asked to do. So I'm not going to hold that bitterness or resentment to say, well, that outcome wasn't what I wanted, so that was the wrong call. We can't control outcomes, but we can control the obedience to lead you up to that point.
Yeah. Well, and I think a way to think of that too is we control the meaning, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's probably where we can go off track is if we have associated, like, if I do this, then this is the meaning. And if we're attaching the wrong meaning to it, I think it's going to screw things up.
Yeah.
But Tim, I think about all you've done with many hands over, a long period of time. You've got a unique gift or ability to bring people together in harmony with a big idea, like helping, people down in Haiti, for example. What do you think, what's been the one attribute that and I want you to talk about yourself for a minute, okay? But you possess many great, skill sets in your personality, but what do you think has been the one, I'll just call it gift from God or unique ability that you've been bestowed or that you've actually fostered that's helped you do what you've done, because you've had to bring so many people together and get people working in harmony with this idea of, going many miles away to impact people. Yeah. How have you been able to do that?
Well, that's a little bit of a tough question, but in reflection back to me, I think the unique gifts that God has given me is I've always been an ability to hear people's dreams and to be able to help them manifest those dreams into reality and create routes to them. So when I talk about our families in Haiti, I have a firm belief. I believe strongly that every child deserves to be fed in the first 1,000 days of life and deserves to be above the malnourishment line by the age of 5. Every child deserves that. Every parent deserves the opportunity to be the champion for their own child, that they get to make the decisions what's best for their child, that they get to have the power to be able to decide what's best. And again, working in a country like Haiti, I've seen parents who've had to abdicate their power because they put their kids in an orphanage or some other situation because they think that's the only opportunity for their child, and they've had to abdicate the power as parents because they're like, well, that's what a Western American culture does is we come in and we set up an orphanage, and the best thing for us to do is to give our child up to that orphanage, and that's what happens time and time again. And so when I talk about my families in Haiti, it's a dream for what I think the family could actually look like if they had the opportunity to have the economic resources, the spiritual stability, the homes that actually are a home. We've rebuilt over 1,000 homes because you have to have safety in your home. The ability to have education that actually changes someone's mind, not just rote memorization. And so being able to do that and then taking that vice versa is people that I encounter here in the States. They have a dream for what their life is and what they want to do and what they want to be. But they get clouded by the distraction. I think distraction is the enemy for most of us listening to this podcast. It's not resources. It's not relationships. It's actually distraction, because distraction takes away our focus. And when we get unfocused, then we start to go off on places, and we end up at these places where, how did we get here? Well, you took one foot in front of another through distraction. And so what I love to do is when I send people down to Haiti or to Abaco is to give them space to encounter an incredible person or an incredible story or an incredible experience, so that it reframes their mind of thinking, gives them time to actually think what's important to me, and then to be able to come back with a plan, an actual action plan to come back and change that. So just like our families in Haiti or in Abaco, we give them plans. We give them places. This is the route out of this. Now, if you choose to not do that, that's your choice, but we are helping you navigate a path out, and vice versa. Those that go on trips, is we give them an ability to, how do you share your story with people? How do you share what's happening? How do you take this, I call it a firestorm experience, because it's like when you go to Disneyland or Disney World. Like, you can't recreate Disneyland or Disney World, but yet hopefully you're in awe and you're inspired and you have this they say that that's the incredible dream, to go to Disney World and all those kind of things. But yet that doesn't really happen in the day to day when you go back home. But you go experience this so that you come back home and be like, well, how do I incorporate some of that magic into my own life? I don't need Disney World to go do that. I just need to be able to do these little things. And again, you start peeling back the layers like, well, what made that really amazing? And a lot of times it comes back to intention. Like I tell people all the time is like, when you wake up and you start your day with devotions and in the word, like it starts your day in a good path. Then you go out and you serve in a way that you're not thinking, what can I get in return? Like, you know what? Good things happen. Yeah. And then you come back as a community and you do a meal together and you decompress together and you talk together and you connect. You know what? Life gets richer. It gets more full. And that's the hope through these things, is that they get a glimpse of this so then they can come back to their own lives and how do I incorporate that? I'm not going to go necessarily and move to Haiti or Abaco, but yeah, I can do things right in my backyard, do the same thing. So back to your earlier question, I think what I've been able to do is cast a vision of what's possible, to challenge the narrative of what's in our lives and be able to have through action, here's how we can navigate a course to get to that point. And whatever that looks like, it changes form based upon the situation, because where someone in Abaco or Haiti is coming from a place of poverty, let's say physical poverty, that's a different avenue out than for us that come from a mental or spiritual poverty. But yet both have things they're trying to get to. And maybe they're getting hung up on different points of why they aren't accessing the things that they want to uncover. But I think that's part of it, is like, how to remove the roadblocks so that they can walk the path that they were created to walk.
Yeah, I think, in experiencing that impact firsthand down in Abaco with my son, when you think about the average American's living on like $38,000 a year, and then down there it's probably, $2 a day or something. So it was a reset for me, and I know for RJ, because I don't think RJ had really seen the level of poverty that we experience together. So it is a reset for. Yeah.
I think it was a reset in the sense of, you had said the word narrative, and we all have a narrative, and most of it has been conditioned from our environments. But very few people are thinking about, how do I change my narrative? I need to change my narrative because there are so many distractions. They're living a life of distraction. And to say that you got my son, who, 20 some years old, his attention from all of those distractions, because there's so many today, he was able to bring a piece intentionally of that magic back, and he's changed. Like, so you're on to something.
Yeah.
and something big.
And I've seen it. I really have seen it time and time again. And so I think when it's done in love and it's wrapped with the right intention, and part of the journey on that one in particular was, well, what does a father-son relationship need to look like? Let's challenge that narrative. What could that look like? And that's encountered, in a space that allows for that to happen. I mean, that's half the, like I talked about, started the show here. The environment you create, what surrounds you, will absolutely play a role and a factor into where you're going to end up. So again, if your environment, you're filling your environment with the wrong narratives, the wrong shows, the wrong podcasts, the wrong people, the wrong relationships, in a wrong, meaning like that's not where I want to be. Because there isn't necessarily a right and a wrong, and there's a moral right and wrong, but ultimately it's, who do I want to become? Who am I, and who am I trying to become? And if we can help people with the environment around them so they can encounter it, because ultimately you have to own that. Like, I can't tell somebody, well, this is who you're supposed to become. No, I can speak truth into them. I can give them an idea of how I see them, but ultimately they have to own that on their own accord. And that's where part of that is speaking truth into people's, number one, like our people are serving Haiti in Abaco, like, you are made in God's image. Like, you are a child of God, and you have a role to play on this earth. Like, you aren't just supposed to be here to be like getting and receiving all the free handouts that we give you. Like, you are an active member of society, and you can be part of your change. And vice versa, for those that I send down that are of more of my bent, is that, you know what? You aren't God. You can't control outcomes. But what you can do is you can walk in obedience. You can respond to what's around you. And then ultimately is that you surrender some of the things that need to be surrendered, because that's not going to actually bring you true happiness and true joy. And so that's part of my job, is to help equip and instill that into people, to show them something bigger, something better, and then allow them the space to encounter on their own initiative, so they can come back and incorporate in that life wherever they're going back to.
Yeah. Well, so Tim, all of this was kind of set up through your relationship with your dad.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, because I want to go there for a minute and kind of focus on this father-son relationship if we can. You talk about standing on your dad's shoulders. Like, what does that really mean to you? Like, how did that impact you in such a positive way that you're able to do what you're doing today? Tell me more about your dad for our audience and what, he passed on to you.
Yeah. So my dad was grew up an Iowa farm kid in a little small town, 1-room school building, where you literally had the coal stove in the middle, like in Iowa. And he was a school teacher by trade. Then he got his master's degree and was a guidance counselor at a school. But like a lot of people, when he started having kids, he felt he wasn't making enough money. So he went into the business world, and he set up a distribution for Pella windows, was very successful in that, but his heart was always being called back to serving. So he actually left that and he went into an alternative high school. So he helped start an alternative high school for kids that dropped out of high school. And he did that for a number of years until he started the organization called Goal Setter Systems, which is the high-end basketball hoop company. And that really then married kind of a lot of things. My dad was a sports person. He loved basketball. He was a basketball coach. But then he could help kids. And the reason why he started it wasn't to go be a millionaire or that kind of thing, or to start a business. He started it because he saw his son, me, who my dad's a basketball coach, and I was trying to shoot at a 10-foot rim, and I was shooting it from my ankles. And he's like, that's the wrong form. We got to get you the right form. Let's lower the hoop down. And there was no hoops out there. So he's like, well, I think we could create a hoop to help you do this better. And him and my uncle then went and they had some resources and some connections. And my dad, being a connector through the coaching world, he had all these connections into different places, and he started selling hoops to basketball coaches. And that's really how that all started. And so he did that for a number of years until they sold. And then he finished his career. He went back into being a guidance counselor at a middle school because he filled in for there was the guidance counselor was pregnant, and so they had no one to fill in. And my dad just recently retired. They called him and said, hey, would you come and fill in there? So he did that. And then he ended his final one was to do pastor of calling. So all this wrapped up to he helped people in their most distressful times, whether that be nearing death. He walked a lot of people through death and the families through death, or in a crisis situation as the pastor of calling at a large church. And that's where his heart really was. And so it's beautiful to see the narrative of the jobs, but the jobs are only part of who you are. Like, you aren't your job. Your identity is being formed and made through all that.
Yeah.
And I think one thing my dad encountered more and more was that he was a child of God. He was imperfect, but through Christ, he was made perfect. And because of that, he wanted to love people better. And he didn't really get that figured out until later in life. But he's the one that went to Haiti in 1986. So in 1986, when I was 7-year-old Tim, I saw my dad go to Haiti. And there's this guy in a goofy straw hat, with the only skin color of my skin color. And everybody else looked a very different skin color. And he served that country, and he brought those pictures back home. And so 7-year-old Tim grew up looking at these pictures of his dad serving in a different place. And when I turned 18 years old, and I challenge what's possible, I'm a challenger in life. If you haven't figured that out, I challenge, which when you're younger, that's called stubbornness. When you get older, you call it tenacity.
Right.
And so when I was 18, I said to my youth group, I'm not going to go to Kentucky to build homes like everybody else. We're going to go international. I want to do something international. So I got 6 of my friends to say yes as well. And I called the place where my dad had served when I was 7 and said, hey, I really want to take my friends internationally. Would there be an opportunity to come serve in Haiti? And that's how I ended up in Haiti. And so,
awesome.
There's so many, I call it breadcrumbs, that he put into my life. And it's pretty cool to see that then become reality as this has now moved on. And the thing my dad would say, 100%, if you were sitting right here today, he'd say, I always knew I just wanted to go help people. But me, Tim, you've been able to take all the things I wanted to do in life and to actually make them happen. Like you are
really
so
good.
beyond me. And he said for a little bit it was frustrating him. He's like, man, you just sit and like all of a sudden these things just come to you and you just have all these thoughts and ideas and how we can get there. And I like just want to go love people and do it more, but like I have no idea how to actually do this. And so he says, you just been able to take the things that I felt in my heart, but you've been able to actually put them into practice. And that's a gift that I think I've been given. And it's an honor to do that in my dad's legacy.
So when you say I've been able to do that and you say it's a gift, what is it?
What's the gift?
Yeah.
It's been able to take all this stuff that again, I think we think what has to be possible to make something happen, and I can put it into reality. So I have what called the pyramid of transformation for what I do in Haiti, and there's really 6 core building blocks that I look at, and I look at geographically saturated areas. So when I come in an area, we're going to go an inch wide, mile deep. So I'm not going to just do education across the whole country. I'm going to look at a community and say, what are the 6 elements that need to be present in this community for true transformation to happen? And that's around education, that's around leadership development, that's around agronomy, to be able to grow their own food, agriculture, around safe homes, medical assistance, and economic development. If we can do those 6 things with the same families over and over and over again for a 7-year period, we start to see actual change in that family, where the belief system of them changes. And so to be able to put that in a way that people could tangibly understand it, and then to be able to share that with the families, that now you can see them owning, like, yes, I have the power to be the mom and dad to take care of my family. I have the power to do that. And then vice versa for those that are back here to say, those resources that you have, the voice that you have, that's not for your own benefit. Like if we have resources or a voice, that is to use that voice, your influence and affluence, to go for those that have no influence or affluence. That's the job of influence and affluence, is to go use it for people who have no influence and affluence. And so be able to connect those two where it is a true relationship. It's not just it's not transactional. I just give and they receive, and then they receive, and ultimately it changes both of us. That's transformational, not transactional. And so being able to do that in a way that is different maybe than others have done, I think that's what I've been able to do.
But I think what you say to do different than what others have done, most individuals get caught or hung up with, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and then they start with the how. Right. Versus I think what you've started with was my big idea, my vision, my dream, my outcome, and you let go of the how and allowed it to come to you.
And the one thing that I'll say was, so when in 2011 is when I went full-time into this, and there was 10 years of prep work to get there. I thought I was going to run Goal Setter Systems, my dad's company. That's what I grew up. I went and got my master's degree on that. I did all these business plans for it. I went to the company. When I got to the company, it was very evident that the company needed to sell. My dad was 63 and my uncle 61. This was their whole life savings. They needed to sell. And I'm so glad I helped walk them through that. But then I was like, okay, well now what? What's for me? And what I learned is all this prep work that I thought I was doing for Goal Setters wasn't for that. It was for this unique thing that had my name all over it. The fingerprints of this was all over it. And I could be able to take all these gifts and passions and this talent and be able to put it in a way that was tangible so we could actually do this. And so 11 is when I went full time, but it took sacrifice because I went and took no salary. We sold our house. My wife and I sold our house, and we went down to like an 800 square foot cracker box. I mean, it was just a small little house. But we had this belief that what we were saying is actually possible. And what I heard was be available, and be available for conversations and relationships, because that's how this is going to happen. That's how this is going to move. And the more I could be available to have conversations, to actually talk with people, then this would actually become, because before I had a really high paying job, I was influential, all the things. And I convinced myself that I was still using my influence and affluence, because I would have a conversation like once or twice a year with some influential person and talking about this. And I was mirroring or disguising or giving myself a false narrative about, well, that's you're using your influence.
Right.
But I really wasn't being truthful to myself. If I really want to pull back the layers, I wasn't. And when I said, you know what, I'm going to be truthful to myself, and I'm going to be all in. Like, this isn't a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. Then I started having 5 conversations a day, 6 conversations a day. And then that just all of a sudden that opened up this opportunity and this opportunity. And I always took it as, let's go the extra step. So again, you asked me to be on this podcast. This is part of my DNA. I'm going to drive 3.5 hours to go be part of it in your house, because that's different than saying, yeah, sure, I'll jump on a Zoom call with you. And I'm not saying like one is right or one is wrong, but that's the DNA of who I am. And that's the DNA of our organization. When we have a child in Haiti that is sick, and we've had lots of them. There's one lady in particular, one little girl, she was about 6 years old, and she had this massive tumor in her eye. And her father brought her to us and said, is there any way you could help? We've been to the doctors. They said they can't do anything. They basically said, go back to your house, get a coffin ready for her, because we're going to bury her. That's the story that the doctor said to her. And we said, no, we don't believe that's possible. And we believe there's a better story. And so I called University of Miami Hospital. I called University of Iowa. I got all these doctors across the country to say what's possible, because we're going to save this little girl's life. And they said, well, there is something, but you're in Haiti, and, surgery's going to be tough. And lo and behold, there happened to be, like that week, a surgeon from California performing these surgeries for girls for little kids like this. And we just had to get her there. We had to drive her 7 hours to get there. So you know what we did? We hopped in a car, we drove her down there, we got her to the doctor, and they did the surgery on her, and they removed the cancer. And again, I would love to say this was a rosy outcome, but here's the thing: we got the cancer removed. She lived for about 1.5 years with no signs, no symptoms. The cancer came back, and the cancer did take her life. But here's what I can tell you: after we buried her, we paid for the coffin, we paid for her to have a funeral, because otherwise she would have been thrown in a box and no one would have shown up, and there'd been nothing for her, because that's what you do in Haiti. We had a funeral for her. We honored her. We held her up. Her father came to us a couple days later and says, I want to thank you for standing up for my little girl, because as a father, I didn't know what to do. And there was no one everywhere I was going, they're saying, no, just go bury her. But you showed her love. And I know that I wasn't alone on this final journey with her.
Wow.
And the outcome for us, initially was like, we got to save her, but this wasn't about saving her on this side of earth. The goal was like, how do we make sure that family knows that they are loved, that they are cherished, and they are worthy to someone to show up, even in the midst of the hardships, because we're going to bury them together.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. Yeah. And you know what I thought of, Tim, is when you shared your story, this like it came full circle for you. The day that morning you got a call from your mom that she told you that, hey, Tim, I think you need to come to the house. I think this is it for your dad. I mean, can you segue how that came full circle, that type of scenario that day came for you?
So again, I think if you have intention and you do some reflection, you'll see that there's breadcrumbs of blessings throughout.
Yeah.
And so one of the declarations that I made when it was looking like this might be the final 5-6 weeks for my dad, as I said, I'm going to be the one to help my dad finish well. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of back to that story. It's just ingrained belief that I'm going to help him finish well. And I was sitting with my dad about 2 weeks before he passed away, and I said to him, I was like, Dad, what's going on? Just talk to me about where you're at. I don't have any idea. And he goes, I'm not scared to die. I know Jesus, and I'm actually excited just for that part of it. I'm good there.
That, yeah.
But what I don't know is how do you get there? What's that mean? Do I close my eyes? I just wake up there? I have no idea what it means to go from here to there. And he goes and he looks at me and says, I'm awful with directions. And he is. He was completely terrible directions. And GPS is one of those life-saving things for a marriage. My mom and dad, that was the best thing they could have done. No marriage counseling, GPS, that was the best thing. Because mom was supposed to guide and direct him. And when she messed up, it wasn't the redirect, like we do now. It was the yelling, and then she'd have to figure out how to get dad where he needs to get to. But anyway, he said to me, he goes, if I know this is really selfish, but if your mom could just sit beside me and tell me where to go, and until I could get to where I need to get to, I don't want to take her away from here, but I would love for her to go with me. That would be a real comfort to me. And so when my mom called and said, Tim, something's changed in your dad's breathing, I think you need to come here. I went over there, and it was my wife and myself and my mom in the room. And for those that have been near death, you can sense something different happening in the room. And my dad's was really deep breaths. His eyes were open, but not really there. It was kind of flickering. And my mom had music playing in the background that they had selected for this time. And my mom went and sat at his right hand, and I sat at his left hand, and my mom at his feet. And we just sat there and we watched my dad. And then pretty soon the breathing got quicker and shallower, and you could just sense something was changing in the room. And then my mom looked at me and she goes, I think we need to pray for your dad right now. And I had the gift to witness one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. And my mom sat at my dad's side and she said, Jesus, I have loved this man for 56 years. I have faithfully stood by his side. I have gone to where he's needed to go. I have supported him, but where he's going, I can't go with him. And so today, Jesus, I need you to come down. I need you to take his hand. I need you to take him home. Denny, I love you. I will always love you, and I will see you again. And she said, amen. And within that amen, he took one more breath, and he was gone. And I got to witness my mom fulfill my dad's wish to sit there and hold his hand, direct him where to go, and for Jesus to come down from heaven to come and get my dad and take him home. And that was such a gift that I was being able to give. I was given on that time. And for me, like, I just hope someday that, like, I can love my wife so well and so honor her so much that either I get to do that for her or she gets to do that for me, because obviously we can't go at the same time necessarily. And so I just look at that and say, you know, you can't plan those things, but yet with intention. And when you live a life outside of this, when those times come, it's not a force. It's who you are. It's where you come from. And so going back to your earlier question is like, my dad wasn't perfect by any means, but there was a point in his life where he lived in such a way that he just who he was. And because of that, there's a lot of people today that know a love deeper than what they knew before.
Wow. I mean, I've heard that you tell the story a couple different times, but it just always gets me right here. So appreciate you sharing it. It made me think back.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say we need Kleenex in the studio moving forward. So I failed that one. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I mean, I do really love how your story with your dad, I mean, it came full circle, like you said. And I mean, he gave you the launching pad for you now to carry that on with your son, AJ.
Yeah.
But you have the model.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about that, like what's the narrative that we pass on. And you've done such a great job with it. But you had it modeled from your dad, so.
And that goes back to your earlier question. There's so many of us that haven't necessarily had that model. And the end of the day, though, is there's a point in our life where you choose whether I'm going to continue that narrative or whether I'm going to break the narrative. And for a lot of listeners that are listening here, you know, maybe that hasn't been what you wanted it to be or what it should have been or what it could have been. But we all get the choice today to choose whether we want to continue that narrative or not. And, you know, I when I do the public speaking, I always share is like, you know, you've been given a box. Sometimes that box is filled with manure because you've been handed a big old box of poo. And the end of the day is like, are you going to say, well, that's what I was given, I'm going to pass that on to somebody else? Or, and that's part of my family tree. Or am I going to then build a new hole?
Yeah. And
plant that, because that's some of the best fertilizer in the world to plant a new tree. But you still have to do the work to say, I am going to go do that. And I'm not just going to pass it on to somebody else.
So last question, is forgiveness pretty easy for you then?
I don't think forgiveness is easy for anybody. I think forgiveness is one of the most, it is hard in general. But I can also say that I am a work in progress. I have strong beliefs, and with strong beliefs comes some deep convictions, and sometimes deep convictions can get in the way of asking for forgiveness. But here's the thing is I think, and I told my daughter this because she's wired like me, is for those that have with strong convictions is you got to learn to say sorry faster, because those convictions can light other people on fire fast. because all passion.
That's well said, Tim.
And
That's well said.
so we have to get better at saying I'm sorry faster, because it doesn't mean we're taking away the passion. The passion is not to be neutered. But with passion, sometimes that flames into areas that you didn't intend. And so we have to be intentional with, I'm also willing to say I was off, or I was wrong, or I'm sorry. And so I think that's for me where I've gotten stronger in that, and I've gotten better in that, is to be able to recognize my strength is also some of my greatest weakness, and I can really hurt people real fast. And so I have to be able to turn around and say I'm sorry, or forgive me, and truly mean it from a deep place of abiding. I think is the way I'd say abiding. And if I am connected with God, I think that happens easier. But when I go off on my own, that's when it really gets rough and gets derailed.
I'm so glad you said that. And it's a consistent theme that I think needs to be reiterated over and over so we get to practice it. And I'm going to go back to when Matthew West was on our podcast. He said, run the race and be the first to say you're sorry. And it sounds so good until you say, I'm going to do that, and then you get to practice it. But I think it's so important. I love that, it's the ability to be the first, and that takes a lot of strength. Anyway, there's so many things coming in my mind through this conversation, and it's meaningful, and it was intentional, and I appreciate you being here with us.
Well, it's an honor. I encourage both of you, continue on the race that you've been given. This podcast, it's not by randomness. It's not by happen chance. And I think the world needs more forgiveness. I mean, right now, more than anything is to show true love for forgiveness could be the greatest gift we give the world. And I think that's a message that needs to be shouted from the mountaintops. And so you always know you got a champion me to come help you wherever possible. I will say yes, and just tell me where and when, and I will be there to help you guys with this vision of really helping the world forgive well.
Tim, you're awesome. I just love that we were blessed to have you here on our first podcast in our own studio, and you helped christen the Time for Forgiveness podcast with your amazing story. And I love what you said about this being open to forgiveness. And for those of you that are out there, there's a lot of ways you can get there. We do have a workbook on our website at timeforforgiveness.org. So you can find a tool there that might help you navigate that process. We break it into 4 easy steps. You can work through it very quickly and get there. I think it's just a choice. Like you said, it's an intention that you're going to make that a piece of your life, that you're going to be willing to say, hey, I need your forgiveness, and ask for it. So thanks for being a model of that today, Tim. Yeah. All right. Well, we're done here, I think, with Tim Brand at Time for Forgiveness. Tim, let's just wrap up our conversation. Your book, where can those folks find a copy of your book? And if they want to help Many Hands in some way, how do they find you there too?
So the book itself is available on pretty much any outlets. Amazon.com is probably the biggest one. It also has an audio version as well. So you can get that on Audible, any of the iTunes stuff, it's out there. So go ahead and pick up the book. And actually all the proceeds of that book go back to helping our ministry. So again, if you want to help other mothers and children in particular stand on the shoulders of somebody, that's the goal. Is like, this book is my father did this. We in turn take the profits and proceeds of that and turn around and hand it to other people to help them be able to stand on the shoulders of those that have given, and so that someday their kids can stand on their shoulders as parents, because they're there. Other would be mh4h.org, which is our Many Hands for Haiti website. And I would encourage anyone, if you're looking to find a place to help, the exact things I've talked about, is helping families, strengthening families, and really be intentional about how do we change the narrative for families. That's the place to go do it. And we do this every day, all day, for about 25,000 people across the world. It's an amazing opportunity, and just so incredibly blessed and humbled to be able to lead this day in and day out. And the stories that I get to hear, because I get to sit with these people and I get to hear their stories, and it's amazing.
Tim Brand, Many Hands. Get behind Tim, help him out. And again, we love you guys at Time for Forgiveness. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and for watching Time for Forgiveness. Hey, listen, visit our website at timeforforgiveness.org. And here's the great news. You can now download our workbook. Just click on the QR code. It's that simple. You can also message us on our website because we read every single message, and we certainly love to help. You can also reach us on our socials on Instagram and Facebook, and you can email us, again, at info@timeforforgiveness.org. I'm Sean Parr for Bob and Kelly Pascuzzi. We'll see you next time on Time for Forgiveness.